All right, so within Python, we have several different what we call data types. Now, we have some very common data types that you've seen in the reading, such as an integer, right? So an integer is just a whole number. We can validate that with type, and we have an integer. Now, we also have what we call floating point numbers, and just think of these as decimals. So anything that is not a whole rounded number. When we check the type of that, it is what we call a float, right? So just think of these as decimals. Now we also have strings. So strings, within Python, we can use 3 different conventions for strings. We could have single quotes. This is a string. And when we evaluate that, we see that the output has quotations in it. Now, here's one thing. If we wanted to just add a print statement, what will happen is the print statement will print the string, but without the quotes. Now, we can actually do this with single quotes. We can use double quotes. Get the same output when we print. And we can also do what's called triple quotes. Okay. And all 3 of them, when we print this out, we get the same thing. And we actually get the same thing regardless if we use the print statement or if we don't. Now, so what's the difference between the single, the double, and the triple? Well, for the single and the double, there really isn't much of a difference. If you start looking at what's considered more Pythonic, you'll see people use double quotes more often. And the main reason for that is because it's easier to incorporate any type of a single quote you may have in there. For example, say I wanted to instead have this be I'm a string. So now I've got a single quote here because of the verbiage I am using within the string. And by encapsulating those with double quotes, it will be represented as a single quote within the string itself, right? So that's kind of one of the main reasons people tend to prefer double quotes. But honestly, if you choose to use single or double, it's more of a preference thing. Now, what about the triple quotes? Well, the main thing here is this allows us to actually extend a string into multiple lines. Now, when we print this out without the print statement, we're going to notice a slight difference here within Jupyter. We see we have this backslash and then n. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, it's kind of a hidden, more of an HTML type of result. And the reason for that is it's incorporating a new line, right? So where we have this break to a new line, we're adding this backslash n, which signals a new line in HTML. So when I actually print this out, we're going to see that we actually get a new line. We don't see that backslash n. It's a signal that we want our output to be broken into a new line at that point. So that's the main reason that we use triple quotes, is simply because we want to have some kind of a comment or a string that extends onto multiple lines. All right, so there are some other data types that you will hear about. Lots of times people classify lists, tuples, and dictionaries as data types. I tend to think of these more as data structures. These are objects designed to hold actual data itself, right? We use lists to hold integers, floats, strings, or even other data structures such as tuples. Same thing with dictionaries. You know, we use those to hold information that is typically integers, floats, strings, and so on. So I tend to classify these 3 as data structures. We will cover those in a later lesson in this module. But there are 2 other data types that I want to mention that we're not going to dig into right now. We'll cover them later. One is going to be Booleans, Okay, and so Booleans are simply true and false, right? So these are actually key values within Python that represent truth and false. Okay, and so if we actually look at the type of this, we will see that we get bool as an output, right? So the actual type of this true and false is Boolean. There's only two options, right? That's hence Boolean. We only have true and a false. We will use these as we start talking about conditional statements, which we'll actually discuss a little bit in the next lesson and then more in depth in a later module. So just be aware, Booleans is one more data type that you're going to start seeing in future lessons. Another one that we'll talk about later on as well is this thing called none type. Okay, so within Python, we have none, and this is actually an object as well. If we look at the type, we see that it is none type. Okay, this basically signals that a null object. Okay, and we will see how to use these later on. But for this lesson, what we're really focusing on are these first three: integers, floats, and strings, and how we can start to do operations on those.